Welcome to the Infowars Nightly News. I'm your host, Melissa Melton, and here's what we have coming up for you on this Thursday, January 24th, 2013 edition.
Tonight, CNN's Piers Morgan falls ill just days after receiving the flu vaccine. And country legend Dwight Yoakam says that was a bad idea.
Don't ever take a flu shot again.
Then, MSNBC attacks Infowars. Meanwhile, Infowars.com continues to dominate MSNBC on the internet. And Dianne Feinstein officially launches her attack on the Second Amendment. That's up next on the Infowars Nightly News.
During Hillary's Benghazi testimony, Rand Paul actually told her if he was president, he would have relieved her of her post.
Thank you for appearing, Secretary Clinton, and I'm glad to see your health is improving. I'm glad that you're accepting responsibility. I think that ultimately with your leaving, you accept the culpability for the worst tragedy since 9/11. And I really mean that. Had I been president at the time and I found that you did not read the cables from Benghazi, you did not read the cables from Ambassador Stevens, I would have relieved you of your post. I think it's inexcusable.
And it is inexcusable. And what Rand is specifically talking about is unclassified cables between the Benghazi Post and the Obama administration that were going on for well over a year. And a maximum alert was actually sent by Ambassador Stevens on September 4th, just a week before the attack, to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, saying that there was a threat of an imminent attack. She didn't read it, and then he died. And it doesn't matter that she got sick and had a concussion later, and now she's having all these histrionics. Whatever, he's still dead, and it's still partially her fault because she didn't even read these threats that were sent, these warnings that were sent directly to her. She couldn't even be bothered to read that, and people had to die because of it. And apparently in response to that, MSNBC attacked Infowars, accusing Rand Paul of getting his, quote, absurd information from us. Let's take a look at that.
Joining me tonight, Joy Reid, managing editor of thegrio.com, and former Admiral Joe Sestak, and former congressman from Pennsylvania in the United States Navy. For 30 years, also worked in naval intelligence.
The most ridiculous, almost comical line that was used at the hearings today was Rand Paul saying, had I been president. Give me a break. Is he getting his information from Infowars? Breitbart, that's their sources of news and intelligence, and that's what they're using to question our Secretary of State. It's absurd.
Maybe he is getting his information from Infowars. A lot of people do, because most people, if they wanted to hear what the White House wanted them to hear, they'd go directly to the source, just the way that MSNBC goes directly to the White House for their agenda. And actually, to further prove that point, we have the Alexa ratings for both Infowars.com and MSNBC.com. Let's take a look at these. As you can see, they're at 729 in the U.S. Oh, we're at 393. Yeah. So apparently they are coming directly to us to get their news and not to you. I'm pretty sure there's a reason for that. And moving on, Senator Dianne Feinstein has now unveiled her promised attack against our Second Amendment rights on Capitol Hill today. Let's take a look at that hot mess. Feinstein rolls out draconian attack on our Second Amendment. And the purpose of this bill is to dry up the supply of these weapons over time. She just straight up says that. Therefore, there is no sunset on this bill. How poetic. And Obama's vowed to sign Feinstein's legislation if it clears hurdles in Congress. And if that's not Twilight Zone-ish enough, Michael Bloomberg is apparently all up in the Twilight Zone. In his nationwide effort for tighter gun control, Michael Bloomberg attributes historic crime lows in New York to strict gun laws that are strictly enforced. However, the actual percentages don't show that at all, because in 2012, crime went up in New York City by more than 4% over the previous year, and the jump in citywide crime rate has continued through the 6th week of the year, up 5% so far, with thefts and robbery accounting for the increase. Robberies, burglaries, and grand larceny are all up 10% citywide. And as Kurt Nimmo points out, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out why theft is on the rise in the Big Apple. It's because criminals do not fear a disarmed public. And speaking of disarming the public, apparently a Missouri Democrat doesn't want to do that, but she does want to force gun owners to register with schools. Missouri Democrat Senator Maria Chappelle-Nadal wants to force parents to inform school officials of firearms ownership. The proposed law would criminalize and impose a $100 fine on parents who fail to inform public and private school officials, and $1,000 if they're found guilty of negligent storage of a firearm and fail to notify a school that they own a firearm. So it will be mandatory for parents to notify their children schools about their gun supply. So basically, they're not going to take your guns. They're just going to create a database and force you to submit. Well, how about if the government just stays out of our business because it's none ya? How about that? Okay? But at least not all politicians are attacking our Constitution and our Second Amendment, as a fascinating scene played out at a small-town council meeting last week when a mayor stood up for the Second Amendment after a council member tried to pass a motion that would have forced an armed veteran with a concealed carry permit to have his gun confiscated by police. Let's take a look at that video.
I was in the infantry. I'm a disabled veteran. I just want to stand on the other side and urge people to stand for their Second Amendment rights. I myself, I'm a professional with a weapon. I carry a weapon every day.
Would you please ask him if he is armed right now?
I am concealed carrying at this moment.
I'll make a motion that we ask them to check their weapon with the police.
That motion does not pass.
Thank you, Mayor. If I may, I'll excuse myself at this time then. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And that was actually Mayor Scott Dudley. And Mayor Dudley, God bless you for standing up for all of our rights. And actually, you're not alone, because apparently 90 sheriffs and 2 sheriffs associations have now pledged to ignore Obama's gun control. And as Oath Keeper Sheriff Richard Mack wrote, sheriffs have risen up all over our great nation to stand up against the unconstitutional gun control measures being taken. And I would applaud these public servants for their courage and conviction. I would encourage our constitutional sheriffs and peace officers to add their voices to the growing numbers of faithful protectors of our freedom. And the numbers of these sheriffs are growing more and more every day. We're hearing more and more people come out and say they're not going to impose unconstitutional gun control. They're not going to infringe on our Second Amendment rights. They're going to uphold the law of our land. And finally, Jakari Jackson actually passed this story along to me, why young women want AR-15s. And I thought this was a pretty good read. Sorry, President Obama, as young women, we prefer an AR-15 assault rifle with a 30-round magazine for self-defense. In fact, we wouldn't want to be stuck at home without one. In the wake of mass murders like Sandy Hook and the horrific rapes and murders of thousands of women each year, pepper spray, mace, or 5-round handheld pistols aren't going to cut it. And she goes on to talk about how in Georgia, an intruder entered the home of a mother and her 2 children, and the mother grabbed her kids and her gun and went to a crawl space in the attic. And when the intruder entered, the mother fired and hit him with 5 out of 6 shots, and he still lived. But sometimes you only have 1 shot, sometimes you need more. And she says when you don't have time to reload, an AR-15's 30-round magazine gives you the flexibility and security that a handgun will not, and that high-capacity magazines serve as a life-saving insurance mechanism. And my favorite line is the very end when she says, so, Mr. President, use the First Amendment as much as you'd like to rail against our AR-15s, but hands off our Second Amendment right to use them. And that includes my AK-47. We are locked and loaded for the Infowar, and we'll be right back.